We're going to start with a presentation now on acting for rural areas under a new political landscape. To do so, I'd like to invite our first speaker to join me on in the podium, Elisabeth Werner, Director General for Agriculture and Rural Development with the European Commission. Good morning, Elisabeth. And I think you have, you're just reading from notes. Great.
Presentation. Thank you very much, Karen, for the introduction and indeed for everyone for the excellent organization. It's also nice to see the video to get a bit into the mood of what has happened already yesterday. And it is really my pleasure to open the second day of this Rural Pact Conference. Yesterday, you heard both Executive Vice President Fito and our Commissioner Christoph Hansen highlighting how rural areas and its inhabitants are central to our European way of life. But we really cannot achieve European policy goals, competitiveness, sustainability, innovation, resilience without the rural areas. And I liked very much also what Lina said yesterday in the remarked vignette, as you called it, because Lina said rural places are not only asking for support, they are offering solutions. And I think it's in this spirit that I hope you will be conducting the discussions today. As was already recalled, the vision for agriculture and food is our key document for the years to come and how we want to work. It sets out ways to enhance the synergies and the complementarities between the EU funds, several EU funds today. It commits to update the EU Rural Action Plan, and you will focus on this too, and that's in line with the path set already with the long-term vision for the EU rural areas. The publication of the updated Rural Action Plan is planned for early next year. And so today is a crucial moment for us to listen and to engage and to exchange with you, the rural communities, through this conference, because we want to hear now recommendations and how we can make the rural areas stronger, connected, resilient, and prosperous with an eye on 2040 already. Over the last 3 years, there has been a considerable progress on the 30 actions that were included in the plan. And that was made possible thanks to this collaboration that also this conference is part of, between the EU and the rural actors organized in several networks. And we stand ready to continue this good exchange. Dialogue is, if anything, even more important for the mandate of the current Commission and for exchanging with our stakeholders. Let me highlight a few success stories from the Rural Action Plan. First, the networking initiatives. They were carried out for LEADER, for the community-led local development, for the smart villages, for energies communities, also for rural mobility. And for LEADER, these network activities are mostly organized under the EU CAP network, so Common Agricultural Policy Network. And they help bring together people, also young people, and they link the local action groups with a wider policy. I mentioned already environment, sustainability, energy, innovation, all the topics that matter. And then there are the dedicated projects to develop also the economy. And it can be both the social economy in rural areas to help mitigate some of the gaps in public service provisions. And there was this story about how far away kindergartens are and doctor availability and schools and care in general. But it's also about developing the bioeconomy, of course, as an income stream for the rural areas. On the Commission side, we do this via the toolkit on access to EU funds for rural areas, which responds to the needs and the calls for mobilizing funding needed for different projects and different initiatives. And this toolkit or tools is really meant also as an inspiration and as a possibility for you to tap into, to use 26 up to 26 EU funds today. Then we have the Rural Observatory, available since 2022 as an information tool and to visualize data and to make data more accessible. And I'm happy that after my intervention, you will also hear more about the statistics and where we are for an evidence-based policy and initiative. All in all, it was around 280 million euro that has been allocated to rural research and innovation under the Horizon program, including for working also on climate-smart rural communities, because more and more we need to prevent, mitigate, adapt, and not only deal with crisis. But so as you see, quite a lot of these actions is being implemented and a lot is happening already. But still, of course, this is only the first part of the journey, and clearly we need to do more. And as everywhere we go, of course, everyone is very interested now about the future financial framework, the period after 2028. The Commission made the proposal in July. And we really want this policy to be simpler, to be more flexible, but building on the continuity of the tools. But simpler and more flexible, of course, also means you find much less detailed in the legislative text. And with a more targeted CAP, with overall, I think, more priorities competing for limited amount of money, what we need is to make sure that the rural communities, the less developed region, the coastal areas, the islands, the mountains, the eastern border regions, everyone finds their place within the plans. Vice President Fito and Commissioner Hansen have also explained to you already, I believe, more about the concept, about the Commission's proposal. And I am aware that many of you are a bit concerned about what this change could mean. And let me therefore also say it very clearly. We are committed to continuing supporting the development of vibrant rural areas in Europe in line with the strategic orientations, in line with the vision for agriculture, and with the proposals on the future multi-annual financial framework. LEADER in particular remains a key policy tool to address rural communities' local development needs. You all value it, and its role remains central for the future. It's also not so, it is LEADER, but it is the bottom-up way of developing projects and networks to what corresponds to what the citizens need. And in my view, the best way to convince about LEADER, but about the projects in general, is to have the best results possible and the best projects ready, because good projects sell on their own. And so let's also concentrate on identifying the good projects and advertising the good projects. So the aim of the second day of the conference is now, of course, also for you to talk. So there was a lot of speeches and a lot of commission talking. Now it will be about hearing from you in the different roundtables and workshop sessions. There is a lot to do still, and so the priorities have been organized around building resilience, preventing crisis, about the digital transition, which is about, of course, connectivity, but artificial intelligence. It's also about the skills and the possibilities. It's about energy communities, but the green transition then more in general. Also what we can do with the bioeconomy, and you probably know that the Commission is working on a bioeconomy strategy still for this year. It is about demography and generational renewal in farming, a big priority for Commissioner Hansen and for us, where we will have a strategy next month already. And so engaging with the rural young people in particular to build thriving communities is very much of the essence. It's about economic diversification with new initiatives. We have the geographical indication for crafts, but there is also tourism, there is processing, there is generally many possibilities, again referring to the bioeconomy. It's also, again and always, about access to services, so essential, access to good jobs to create the conditions. And that, for me, is what relates directly to the idea of the right to stay and for people's choices, and more work going on this as well that will materialize. And then it's also about how we can make sure that everyone feels included in the rural places, that this is a society that works for all and a community that is encompassing. That last point is one that leads me to my last but actually really, really important point for the discussion. And that is about fighting disinformation also. Disinformation is very important everywhere in the EU. We have figures that show that 73%, so like 3/4 of citizens, have encountered this. And we really need a social resilience as well, for which the rural communities are key actors in different ways, because you can raise awareness in rural communities, you can support fact checkers, you can promote digital literacy, and we would like to strongly encourage you to use the networks to help create an environment where truthful information is being exchanged. This is about democracy, and this is the basis for everything we do. Now, with the Rural Action Plan, actions taken at EU level, real work should be happening also on the ground. And this is why all the stakeholders, particularly also member states, regional authorities, civil society, academia, play their part, and we want to strengthen the Rural Pact. And to do that, I want to just mention two specific matters. First is the engagement with this governance at all levels, and second, the thematic dimension. On the first point, we have engaged with member states, with region, and with local authorities through this pact to promote a more integrated approach to rural policy at all levels, and we plan to strengthen this engagement in the future for these national and regional partnership plans for rural areas. And on the second point, the thematic dimension, it is thanks to your involvement that the community now has 12 thematic community groups well placed to help assess the rural implications of specific policies. They support us in doing rural proofing. They make it easier to consult rural stakeholders on specific topics, and we want to further invest in these thematic community groups as well. So all these topics will be part of the breakout sessions today, and therefore I will conclude looking into the future. From our side, just to say, we have reinforced the budget allocated to facilitation of the services for the Rural Pact for the next 2 years. So this is the very immediate reinforcement. We will continue developing the Rural Pact and the Rural Revitalization Platform. We will also work further on the Rural Observatory, on the rural proofing, and on improving the statistics. You, the Rural Pact community, now count over 3,500 members across Europe. And throughout the years, you have raised awareness, you have built capacity, and we have elevated the voice of rural areas on the political agenda. You are powerful actors, and you are powerful allies in the discussions that will matter over the coming months and maybe year, including on this aspect of what the next EU budget support structure will look like. You have an important role to play to speak up on this, and I would like to encourage you to reach out to your representatives, political representatives, actors, look at our proposals, discuss them with our colleagues, identify all the opportunities offered to better serve the interests of the rural communities, and we will engage in this dialogue, and then there will be an adoption, and we will also issue, as the Commission, recommendations to the Member States where we point to the areas that we want them to pay attention to when developing their national plans. I already want to thank you for your active participation, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion today, and I hope we will remain in touch all the way through the next months and years, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. Well, as Elisabeth was alluding to just now, yesterday we heard very powerful stories about the joys and challenges of life in rural areas and what's needed to ensure that people who want to live there can enjoy happy, fruitful existences along with the right to stay. And of course, the more information we have about what life is like there, especially what the challenges are, which we heard a lot about yesterday, then the more informed people will be when they're making their policy decisions and decisions that will impact on the lives on those who live in rural areas. So our next speaker will now talk about the importance of having better rural statistics for better evidence-based policy making. I'd like to now welcome on stage Teodora Brandmueller, Team Leader, Eurostat Regional and Urban Statistics. Teodora, please come up on stage. I just want to check you have water there and your slide clicker is there. Very good.
Thank you very much. It's truly an honor to be here today and be able to talk to you about rural statistics. So statistics is usually considered to be dry, so I thought I'd start with something which is definitely isn't. So let's talk about wine. Here you can see two bottles. One costs 15 euro and the other 84. Why such a difference? Well, the key is in the label, more precisely in the geographical precision in the label. The more expensive bottle is a Premier Cru. That means we know exactly where this grape is coming from, which village, and it's usually from a specific site with a well-established reputation in producing good wine. The precise origin adds value to this wine. It adds credibility and adds trust. The other bottle is labeled only Bourgogne. It's a generic appellation which can be produced anywhere in that region. It tells us much less about the specific place this grape is coming from. And this is reflected in the price. So what does this all has to do with statistics? Well, the same principles applies to data. Knowing where people precisely live, where services are precisely located, down to the neighborhood or to the village level, it increases the value of the data that we collect. And that's exactly what we have done in the European Population and Housing Census in 2021. We did not stop at the regional level. For the first time, we collected census data using a 1 kilometer per 1 kilometer grid, meaning that instead of showing data for large administrative areas, we now have information for tiny little squares that shows the whole territory of the EU. And this is how it looks like. Each little square you see here is 1 square kilometer, and the color indicates how many people live in that area. It shows us with high precision, with high geographical detail, where population is concentrated and where is it sparse. But we didn't just collect total population. We also generated several other demographic indicators. What you can see here, for example, is the age structure of the population. Areas in red have a higher share of elderly people. You can clearly spot the retirement hotspot of the Belgian coast. Green areas show where younger population is more concentrated. And blue highlights areas with higher share of working age population. And of course, you can also zoom in and move around with the map. And if you are interested, we have a printout version in the data corner in the chateau where you can check exactly your areas. So yeah, here is a bit of a movie showing the other parts of Europe, moving a bit more towards Germany or Southern Europe. As said, okay, I can see it created some discussions already. So the next example I would like to show you is another indicator, it's mobility. So what we see here is whether people lived 1 year prior to the census. So blue cells shows areas where people did not move, so stable population. And red cells show internal movers, so areas where there is a higher share of people who moved within the country. And then in green, you can see areas where there is higher share of international migration. So for example, in Luxembourg, you can see Luxembourg city glowing in green. But these are not just pretty maps. These are detailed, spatially precise statistics which are highly relevant for rural policymaking. They help us identify which rural areas are facing the population, aging, and which are the ones that actually attract a lot of newcomers. And this kind of evidence is essential for addressing the core challenges outlined in the EU Rural Action Plan. The gridded population data is not only valuable for policymaking, actually it also provides us information to do the harmonized definition of rural areas and regions across Europe. But why do we need a harmonized definition? Take a look at these two pictures. Both show 23 degrees, and both are technically correct. But clearly one calls for hot chocolate and the other for ice cream. And the reason, because one is in Fahrenheit and the other is in Celsius. And that's exactly what happens if we are using different scales, when we define rural in different ways. Each definition is perfect for the national context. But when we want to do international comparison, we really need a harmonized approach. And this is why the European statistical system has adopted a common methodology using the previously shown 1 square kilometer population grid as the foundation to define rural areas and regions consistently across countries. And as a part of the EU Rural Action Plan, this classification has been updated using the latest census data, ensuring that it reflects today's realities on the ground. And now, I would like to show you how we use this harmonized definition for international comparison. The first indicator is accessibility to healthcare. As you can see on the left-hand side, the green column for Greece, it indicates that in Greece rural areas, you have to drive on average 30 minutes to reach the nearest healthcare service. By contrast, on the other end of the chart, you can see Malta or Luxembourg, where this is lower, so it's 10 minutes. But what you can also see on the chart, the blue columns, which indicates the values for cities, which, as expected, are consistently much lower than the values for the rural areas. So this is just an example on how the harmonized definition, combined with the detailed population data and geolocal information on services, for example, in this case, healthcare, can be combined to create new indicators and also to identify these gaps we have been talking about. It allows us to monitor one of the key objectives of the EU Rural Action Plan, improving access to essential services and closing this gap. My next example is another key indicator, the share of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion, here again broken down by cities, towns and suburbs, and rural areas. At EU level, the rate is 21%, and interestingly, cities and rural areas at EU level are identical with the value. This is why you only see one marker, because they are overlapping each other. But when we look at individual countries, we can see that this equality at EU level shows a very diverse picture in the member states. On the left, countries like Romania, Bulgaria show very high poverty rates in rural areas, over 40%, much higher than in cities. This is what we often refer to as rural disadvantage, and it's clearly visible across all the countries whose markers are in a light blue background. On the other end of the scale, we see the opposite pattern. In these places, cities have higher poverty rates than rural areas. Take Belgium, for example. Cities have a 30% at risk of poverty and social exclusion rate, while rural areas in Belgium is at 15%. This is what we call a rural advantage. So in these countries, rural areas have a lower poverty rate. At the beginning, I promised you to try to make the statistics a bit less abstract. So here is what I try to do. These photos show rural homes from different countries alongside with the share of people at risk of poverty or social exclusion that we saw in the charts. So just to give some location, some illustration to the figures. And these photos remind us that Europe isn't just a statistical category. It is home to real people with different faces, different realities. And here are just a few of them. It shows that Europe is not just one thing, it's diverse with many different lives and realities. Each rural area has its own mix of opportunities and challenges. And thanks to better data, better statistics, we can now describe this diversity and these realities more precisely. We have now more indicators, a wealth of indicators on households, covering how they are structured, where people are at work, what type of education they have, whether they use the internet, and even how they use social media. But of course, there are things that statistics cannot capture, like what people treasure most. For some, it's family. For others, it's a pet, a hobby, or a childhood toy, or a memory. And that's just as important as the other aspects we can measure. So I'm very much aware of the limits that we can provide by statistics. So to sum up, key achievements of the Rural Action Plan in the area of statistics: we now have a much more detailed population data from the 2021 census available at the 1 square kilometer grid level, which makes it possible to go beyond administrative borders and boundaries to carry out much more flexible spatial analysis. We have now new indicators, for example, on public service accessibility, helping us to measure how easily people in rural areas can reach healthcare, schools, or other essential services. And we have also updated the definition of rural areas using the harmonized methodology based on the latest census data. And finally, we have expanded the range of indicators on rural life, covering health, education, employment, digital society, and much more. Now they are all available in the Rural Europe digital publication. In short, the Rural Action Plan helped us to look closer, and the closer we look, the better we understand, and the better we understand, the better our responses can be. So looking forward, first, we need to tap into new data sources, use more innovative methods, like geospatial data was just one example, but Earth observation and other emerging sources are available to us. It has a huge potential to bring even more insights into rural statistics. Second, we need to keep speaking the same language, with harmonized definitions that allow us to compare rural areas across Europe, and not just defining what is rural, but also how we are measuring things like access to services, so that the comparison will be fair and meaningful. And third, we will continue to enrich the list of indicators that we publish to capture more details and reflect better the diversity of rural life. And as a final thought, let me draw your attention to the photo. This sheep may look like just another face in the flock, but it has a number. And that number tells us that somebody is keeping track. Somebody is watching over it. And just like farmers track their livestock, in Eurostat we are working with the rural communities that they are counted and kept track of. Because better rural statistics isn't just about numbers in Brussels or Luxembourg where we are located. They are about making sure that rural communities are seen and heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teodora.